Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Perez coming to you from Baltimore. President Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela, in a telecast last Thursday, unveiled an attempted coup plot that was being plotted by a retired Air Force general and 13 other people who were all accused of plotting to overthrow the government and also to bomb several buildings in Caracas, including Miraflores, which is the presidential palace, and the Ministry of Defense and the Telesur building. Now joining me to discuss what has been taking place in Venezuela is Lucas Koerner. Lucas is a Caracas-based journalist with VenezuelaAnalysis.com. Thank you so much for joining us, Lucas.
Great to be here. Thank you so much.
So, Lucas, let's begin with what President Nicolas Maduro unveiled on Thursday night on television.
Well, I guess to begin, you have a small group of Air Force officials who developed a plan to use a Brazilian-manufactured Super Tucano aircraft to strike various tactical targets in Caracas on Thursday, including Miraflores Palace, the headquarters of military intelligence, Ministry of Defense, the Telesur, the international media television station. So basically the vital military, political, and communications network of this government. So clearly, to deliver a paralyzing blow to the democratically elected government of President Nicolas Maduro. These Air Force officials dressed in uniforms with U.S.-issued AR-15s, which are assault rifles, which are not available in Venezuela, and paid with U.S. dollars. They recorded a video that was basically to announce a coup d'etat and thereby provoke a general uprising of the military. And this coup attempt has many echoes of the 2002 thwarted, really defeated coup effort in Venezuela, where there was also a pre-recorded video that was released, and you also had successful efforts at first to shut down pro-government or pro-Chavista affiliated media, in that case, the state-owned media. So
Lucas, what evidence did they provide on television during the telecast unraveling the coup plot?
Well, the main evidence is this video that was discovered of these Air Force officers basically announcing their coup plot. We've also discovered the identity. The government has discovered the identity of the aircraft to be used, which is a Super Tucano aircraft that actually reportedly is registered to Blackwater, USA. It was sold by the only aircraft of its kind to be sold to Blackwater, USA. So far they're claiming that it's a foreign aircraft that was to be used.
Was there any evidence provided of that?
So far, most of the evidence is on the basis of what the government has laid out. But the story is still in development, and the government is releasing new evidence as we go.
Right. And what else did they unravel?
They also unraveled that various of the participants in the coup, at least one of them, had a visa, a U.S. visa stamped, I believe, February 4th, meaning that he in the event that the coup went awry, he could flee to the United States. We also see that there was, I think that the biggest evidence was a opposition publication, a statement released by the three main leaders or the most radical leaders of Venezuela's opposition, including Maria Corina Machado, Leopoldo Lopez, and Antonio Ledesma, calling for a transition, a national transition, and a transition government, which is completely unconstitutional, that a government that is elected has to run its course unless the Supreme Court finds that the practices of the president are unethical and takes action.
And they found these recordings where?
This statement came out the day before the coup. And what the authorities are claiming is that this statement was to be the signal for the coup efforts the next day, that this kind of media offensive that was to pave the way for the blow that was to come the next day.
And in what form did this statement appear?
It was published it was circulated via various national newspapers.
And have you seen evidence of that?
I've read the statement.
Okay, and this statement said exactly what?
It called for a government of transition, and it stated that the transition was imminent. That the days of the government of Nicolás Maduro were numbered, and that very soon the government would have to give way to a new transition government that would rectify the policies of the Bolivarian Revolution. There was particular economic clauses talking about the returning at least compensation of those whose enterprises have been nationalized, greater integration into international financial networks, including what we could assume to mean the IMF and the World Bank. I mean, these are. It's important to note that these figures themselves all have links to the Venezuela's oligarchy. That, for example, Leopoldo Lopez is related to the Polar, the family who owns Polar, which is the largest producer of corn flour, which is basically the base of the Venezuelan diet. So you see very much the integration between these political and economic elites in Venezuela.
Lucas, this coup plot took place exactly on the anniversary of the student protest that took place last year. Is that a coincidence?
It most definitely was not a coincidence, any more than the publication of this opposition statement was a coincidence. That what we see is, first of all, the opposition protests last year were known as the Guarimba, and actually, the Guarimba. It goes back to 2004, as it was basically invented as a kind of a tactic, a destabilization tactic. That comes from 2004, the use of street mobilizations and media combined with right-wing media misinformation to create a condition of ungovernability in the country. And that's what you saw from February 12th for several months throughout the country, that students, or those posing as students, because there was many people who we would not consider students, who are paid and have been in the university forever and actually come from various opposition or professional operators of right-wing opposition organizations, set up barricades in cities throughout the country, which they subsequently refused to take down, and actually led to the death of 43 people. Most of those dead, while the international media attributes those dead to the government's repression, the facts on the ground are that the majority of those died as a result. 10 at least were killed by opposition protesters at the barricades. Many more were killed as a result of, for example, ambulances not being able to arrive. So it was really, these were not any kind of democratic, peaceful protests, but they were very much, just one more instance of the highly undemocratic, might even say fascist actions of an opposition that has never been loyal, that has never aligned itself to participating in legal democratic processes. So part of this plan had 4 stages, and in this final stage for Thursday, the idea was to have mass opposition protests on the anniversary of the Guarimba that would trigger supposedly a government response that could justify a repressive government response that could justify a military coup. And what we see is that there actually was. I was at the Central University of Venezuela, which is arguably the heart of the right-wing student movement, on Thursday, and there was barely maybe 100 people out protesting. There was very few people. And there was only scattered actions in the west of the country, violent attacks on the National Guard in San Cristobal. So that part completely failed as well. However, as I can elaborate on that, there were many other stages of this coup plot of a economic destabilization, a international mediatic campaign, as well as political destabilization that had been months in the making.
Now, earlier when you were speaking, you stated that there is some evidence that not all of these people that are protesting are students. So what did you mean by that, and can you clarify how we know they're not students?
Well, what I refer to is that various members of the student who claim to be leaders in the student movement have actually spent, maybe 12 years at the university and are actually members of far-right political parties, like, for example, Voluntad Popular, which is the Popular Will, which is the party of Leopoldo Lopez, who is actually in jail right now for inciting violence. So moreover, we also seen that there's the various Colombian paramilitaries. There's evidence that they have participated in these protests. I mean, you saw a lot of deaths by snipers during this period. For example, in Merida, someone was killed by a sniper from a distance of 50 meters. I mean, there's clear evidence that students don't know how to shoot at that distance. So there's definitely some professional military involvement that result in the death of a significant number of people, as well as you saw other instances during this period of this, the setting up of barbed wire, intentionally setting up barbed wire at a height that would decapitate motorcyclists, largely Chavista motorcyclists. And that was a very intentional act on the part of these protesters.
And so that really actually happened. There was a lot of Chavistas who were actually beheaded during this action.
There were I believe there was as many as 10 beheadings. There was definitely several beheadings as a result of that.
Right. One of the things that the government is also alleging is that the United States, Canada, and UK were part of the plot. How did we know that?
Well, I think that at this stage, the government hasn't released concrete evidence linking these governments to this action, but we do have some indicators. I think that to begin, I think that we have to look at this as a multi-state. This whole idea of this coup was a multi-stage process where you had economic destabilization. Basically, you've seen since Christmas a extreme scarcity of various basic goods that are very specific goods, like diapers, toilet paper, deodorant, that before, although were more available. So there's definitely indicators that there's economic sabotage going on that potentially has links to external actors, but also you see that the United States has been completely involved in terms of the latest round of sanctions that were imposed on Venezuela, on various Venezuelan officials 2 weeks ago who were accused of human rights abuses. Yet there's no evidence that they've, as I was saying, they were accused of human rights abuses during these violent opposition protests. Yet there's no evidence that the government, in all honesty, acted with incredible restraint vis-a-vis these violent, disruptive protests.
Now, these sanctions you're referring to, these are sanctions that the U.S. has imposed on Venezuela, on high-level officials who are associated with cracking down on the student protests?
Exactly. These are, for example, travel bans, on those who are accused, of allegedly, as you say, cracking down on protests. For example, the chief prosecutor cannot travel to the United States for this reason. She's actually suing the State Department over these sanctions because they have no base. They have not provided any evidence of human rights abuses to justify these sanctions. I think that the other important evidence, the other important background to point out is that these opposition groups, for example, Maria Corina Machado, her group actually accepts funding from the National Endowment for Democracy, which is affiliated with the U.S. government. So the National Endowment for Democracy has been channeling millions of dollars of funding into Venezuela for the training of opposition activists in all kinds of PR and a whole plethora of different tactics in order to, I would say, better their destabilization capacities. And obviously this is nothing new, that the opposition has been attempting to overthrow the Venezuelan government since it failed in 2002. This is not a new phenomenon.
Right. And one of the things that the Western mainstream media has done with the unraveling of this coup plot is really either silent or very superficial coverage, like in the New York Times, that just referred to what the opposition said and said that the opposition claims that the coup plot was something that the government was using as a tactic to camouflage what was really going on in Venezuela vis-a-vis the economic conditions. Is there any merit to that position?
Well, I think that it's important to understand that first, I mean, the claim that the image projected by the international media is that Venezuela is some kind of authoritarian society that does not have freedom of press, which is utterly absurd, because when you go to any newspaper stand, you're going to see that the majority of the newspapers are of the opposition, and all the TV stations that have the most circulation belong to the opposition. So that claim is completely ludicrous. But I think that you've seen a coordinated, misinformation campaign by the mainstream media in many ways. I mean, in these past few weeks, past months, you've seen very aggressive op-eds in the New York Times against Venezuela. You've also seen the accusations against the president of the National Assembly, Diosdado Cabello, accusing him of narco trafficking. So, I mean, there's definitely an effort to discredit and delegitimize the public face of the Venezuelan government, and the media has been complicit in this. And I mean, lest we forget that the 2002 coup was a mediatic coup, that the way the media presented the events of that day of April 11th, 2002, that it presented sniper killings by opposition snipers. It presented them as Chavistas killing innocent, supposedly innocent, peaceful opposition protesters who were quite the contrary. So I think we have to note that historic precedent.
Very well, Lucas. Thank you so much for joining us and shedding more light on what happened last week in Venezuela. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.